My name is Jessie Stad from Kratos Learning, and on behalf of Links, we want to thank you for joining this webinar, Making the Links Science Online Course Series Work for You. We're really excited to have our presenter share with you today about the concepts behind the Links Science courses and share ideas about how teachers, program managers, and professional developers can use the courses themselves. Before we start the presentation, I want to provide an introduction of our guest speaker, Sharon Reynolds. Sharon is the primary course author of all 3 of the courses, as well as an expert reviewer of the science materials in the Links resource collection. She is very knowledgeable in all aspects of science instruction for adults, gained through her work with the Central Southeast Adult Basic Literacy Education Center in Ohio. Sharon is currently the education specialist for rural and underserved programs at Ohio University's Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine. We welcome your participation, including questions and comments at any point during the webinar through the use of the chat feature. Also, following the webinar, you can continue to post questions and comments in the discussion thread in the science group. Towards the end of this presentation, we'll share the link with you. Today's webinar will cover the following major points. First, we'll review the major objectives of the 3 online courses, with an emphasis on how they're interconnected and build upon each other. Then we'll have an open discussion about the scientific practices. We'll talk about what they are, how you're using them in the classroom, and how students are reacting to them. Then we'll discuss how the courses are being used in the field. We hope to hear from some of you. We'll be sharing our tips and strategies for use for teachers, program managers, and professional developers. Lastly, we'll show you how to access the courses, including the newest one. First, we'd like to know a little bit about who is with us today. Please select the position title that best fits your role. I'm going to pull up a poll here for you. Great, so it looks like the majority of people, about 70% or so, are teachers. That's fantastic, so welcome. I think that's everyone. I'm going to end that poll. And now we'd like to know your experience with the first 2 Links courses. This will just help us tailor our comments a little bit today. So please feel free to choose where you are with the first 2 courses. Perfect. Good, so we'll have some people on today who really, this is an introduction to what the courses are and how you can use them. That's great. Good, okay. So thank you guys for sharing, and this is going to help us target today's presentation to fit your needs. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon to provide an overview of the courses.
Thanks, Jessie. Hi, everyone. I'm going to go through a brief overview of the science courses. And here we go. You can see from this graphic that the 3 courses were designed to build upon each other so that they can be taken in sequence for an in-depth professional learning experience. They can, however, be taken individually in any order, as each course has a very brief review of any prerequisite information. The first course, called Engaging Adult Learners in Science, is the why of the course series. In this course, the participants will explore the relevance of science for their adult learners. Where is science in our everyday lives? What is the benefit to adult learners? Also, the course introduces the 8 scientific practices that were developed and published by the National Research Council in 2012 in a publication called A Framework for K-12 Science Education Practices, Cross-Cutting Concepts, and Core Ideas. This publication and report is changing the way science is being taught. In this course, the participants will meet and hear from an ABE teacher who teaches science. In the course, she shares her professional experience in using science lessons in her ABE classrooms. There are also several video clips of Christina's students doing science. Research suggests that people can increase their self-efficacy through vicarious experiences, through watching another person be successful at the same task. So we hope that the anxiety that some teachers might face when thinking about teaching science in ABE might be alleviated by watching a peer be successful. The course was developed to accommodate teachers with varying levels of experience in teaching science, so we do start at the very beginning by asking, what is science anyway? From there, we talk about science literacy and why adult learners need to be science literate. Then we introduce and explain each of the 8 scientific practices with common, easy to understand, relevant examples and classroom applications. We've included comprehension checks throughout the course to make sure that learners are on track. And then participants are also invited to register for the LINCS Community Science Group. The second science course, Scientific Practices in Context, Curricular Planning, and Lesson Development, is the what of the 3 courses. This course introduces science as a context for teaching. The course provides a pretty comprehensive review of the teaching and learning cycle and introduces the concept of contextualized instruction. We've included relevant links to credible sources for science content in this course and throughout all of the courses, and have included a section on using credible sources. Very important concept. This course provides instruction on lesson planning and unit development, again, all within the context of teaching science. The third course, Project-Based Science Instruction for Career Preparation, is the how-to part of the series. This course introduces project-based learning as a pedagogical approach to teaching science in ABE classrooms. In this course, we also connect science instruction to career preparation. We explore various online resources that teachers can use to guide adult learners in exploring careers in the 5 major STEM subgroups, and then identify ways that STEM workers use science in their careers. Finally, in this course, we describe how ABE programs are using project-based learning in STEM areas. We also explore ways in which science is being used in a PBL initiative for a sample ABE classroom setting. Next, I want to talk about the scientific practices themselves. The courses are intended to support ABE practitioners in applying the scientific practices developed by the National Research Council. Many teachers are likely already using these practices in their science instruction. Let's see how familiar you are with the scientific practices. Jesse, can you put up the poll? Very good. So most people have at least some knowledge of the practices. Some of you are very familiar, fairly familiar with them. So this review will be a review for some of you and maybe some new information for others. So before we talk about the scientific practices, we need to explore why these scientific practices were created and why teachers should use them in their classrooms. To do that, we need to talk about another familiar approach to science instruction called the scientific method. The scientific method is an approach to do scientific investigation and discovery. It involves a systematic process of observation, inquiry, hypothesis, experimentation, analysis, deduction, and inquiry. Although the scientific method has been the paradigm for teaching science in schools for years, the scientific community has recognized that this approach does not really reflect an authentic exploration of science. Instead, the scientific method emphasizes the testing of predictions rather than ideas, and it focuses learners on material activity at the expense of deep subject matter understanding. The scientific practices, as outlined in the NRC report and explored in these 3 courses, are important components of the process of doing science and thinking scientifically. This approach to science instruction is different from the scientific method approach and represents a new way of thinking about and teaching science. The scientific practice's approach represents in a more authentic way the actions that scientists and those in the scientific fields take to investigate questions and solve problems. We're going to cover each of these 8 practices, one at a time. All scientific inquiry really begins with a question. And everything that is done related to that scientific investigation is really driven by the question you ask. Let me give you an example from a couple of different fields of science. You and I may observe the same phenomenon. For example, ask a question like, how can I help my family start eating better? How do I keep deer out of my flower beds? We may observe the same phenomenon such as limited availability of fresh foods in underserved urban areas. You may ask the question, how far does the average person have to walk to access fresh food? And I may ask, what challenges do families in underserved urban areas face in accessing fresh food for their families? Each question requires a very different approach. The first question can be answered with a quantitative measure, possibly GIS mapping software. Question 2 requires a more naturalistic inquiry, perhaps interviewing or focus groups with families living in those communities. This is an illustration of how the scientific method fails to authentically represent what scientists do when they undertake scientific inquiry. It all really starts with observation, an observation to some degree, but what grounds everything is the research question. We all ask questions. We wonder, we worry, but asking questions, good questions, takes practice. And this process of asking an answerable question helps develop critical thinking skills. After we have defined our question, scientists will often create a model that can be used to make predictions, develop explanations, or analyze the situation. In the previous scenario, question 1, how far does the average person have to walk to access fresh food? Researchers may develop a regional map that locates types of stores with fresh food or overlays public transportation and sidewalks. Question 2, again, that requires a more naturalistic inquiry. I may apply a theoretical model to my investigation. As an example, appreciative inquiry is a model that is used in the business world to understand best practice examples. I could use those 4 appreciative inquiry questions as a model for undertaking my interviews with families in those underserved areas. When an adult has mastered this practice, they should be able to construct or use models and simulations to develop explanations, make predictions, test hypothetical explanations, analyze existing systems to see where flaws may occur, test possible solutions, and test proposed systems to recognize strengths and limitations. This practice should be very familiar to us. Once we have a question and a plan or a model, we carry out our investigation. This ranges from simple surveys to complex randomized controlled trials and qualitative investigations, including focus groups or interviews. Again, the plan should be driven by the research question. When the adults have mastered this practice, they should be able to plan and carry out a systematic investigation to solve a problem or test a design, which includes identifying what is to be recorded, identifying dependent variables and independent variables, collecting and analyzing data, and using observation and data to test and revise existing theories. Here is an example of a survey from the USDA related to food deserts. Of all the 8 scientific practices, I'm guessing that this particular practice, interpreting and analyzing data, is the most familiar to ABE practitioners. We as a field have emphasized this aspect of instruction over the years, primarily driven by what we know many of our students will be tested on. It is a critical skill that students will see on the GED and college placement tests and throughout their lives. When an adult has mastered this practice, they should be able to analyze data to derive meaning, use tools to work with data, including spreadsheets, graphs, and charts. They should be able to visualize trends in data and at higher levels conduct statistical analysis, which can be as simple as calculating mean, median, and mode. And finally, they should be able to compare different solutions and determine how well each one meets design criteria and solves the problem the best. Again, we have been teaching math and ABE since ABE began, but here, in this scientific practice, we're talking about using math to analyze data, understand trends, recognize patterns, and make predictions. It does not have to involve complex statistics, but it can. Let's go back to the two scenarios. Question 1 may result in an analysis of the data you saw in the previous slide. Can we understand where those trouble spots are? Can we identify where the food deserts are and create community solutions? When an adult has mastered this practice, they should be able to complete tasks requiring math and computational thinking, such as constructing simulations, statistically analyzing data. They should be able to recognize, express, and apply quantitative relationships, predict behavior, and test physical systems, and assess the significance of patterns or correlations using statistical techniques. So we have asked a question, developed a model, conducted an investigation, analyzed the data. Now we have to ask, so what? What does all of this mean? We have to put the pieces together and create an explanation for our question using our data and our findings. When an adult has mastered this practice, they should be able to develop a logical explanation based on an understanding of science or the applicable model for the situation based on evidence. So you can see where we might go with our line of investigation. We have found that access, for example, to fresh food is a problem for many people in our urban community. So we take our evidence, we craft an argument for increasing access. Our solutions must be able to be supported by our evidence. When an adult has mastered this practice, they should be able to use reason and argument to identify strengths and weaknesses of a particular explanation. They should be able to defend their explanation based on evidence and data and comments of others. They should be able to collaborate with peers to select the most promising solution among competing ideas, and use systematic methods to compare alternatives, formulate evidence based on test data, and make arguments from evidence to defend their conclusion, evaluate the ideas of others, and revise designs. We now have proposed solutions, but who do we need to tell? I'm going to ask for your responses. Please share some of your ideas in the chat feature about who you think we should communicate our results to in our scenario. Some ideas might be city planning council, elected officials, community planners, city planners, nonprofit community groups, local farmers markets. Great, there's some good answers being submitted here in the chat window. Exactly. And I think engaging your students in trying to identify the appropriate audience is another important feature and component of this practice. When an adult has mastered this practice, they should be able to communicate findings clearly and persuasively, orally and in writing, using tables, diagrams, graphs, and engage in discussion with peers. They should be able to derive meaning from scientific texts and evaluate the scientific validity of information and integrate that information. So now that you have an overview, a brief overview of those 8 practices, can you think a little bit about, we're interested in knowing a little bit about how you are using the scientific practices in your instruction and how your students are responding to these concepts. So take a few minutes and type that into the chat, and I'll share some of the those comments. Mary says that her students love the arguing the most. There's a lot of passion in those ABE classrooms. And Rob says that he's focused mainly on incorporating math skills into his science-based lessons. There's lots of opportunities for cross-curricular planning here with either math instructors or integrating that into your science lessons. Very good. Sharon says she mainly focuses on investigation, encouraging questions and creativity. And Rob made the point that the new GED tests lean heavily on data analysis and graph reading. Absolutely, it's a very important part of what we need to teach our students. Very good. Wayne is raising awareness of recycling and encouraging individuals and group participation. Winona is commented that her students are beginning to understand the questions they ask, and the results of those questions they realize they're actually thinking critically. Very good. Excellent.
Sharon, I think your audio dropped off for just a second there.
I think one of the things that's really exciting about science is that it's so relevant to the student's life. Oh. Hello? Okay. Okay, I'm sorry that I guess there was a audio glitch. Can you hear me now? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. Okay. So lots of really good ideas in the chat about how people are using these practices in their classrooms and recognizing that these are really important practices that students are going to need in their adult life, but also, you know, immediately on the GED test and a college placement test. So thank you for sharing those examples. So we have some ideas for you about how teachers can use the courses. I want to make the point that the courses are not just for ABE teachers who want to teach science, but good instructional practices are incorporated throughout each of the courses. So regardless of your content area, if you want to develop, for example, your unit or lesson planning skills, you might take course 2. If you want to learn more about how to incorporate project-based learning into your instruction, regardless of your content area, you might want to take course 3. So those are some ideas that we've thought of, but we'd like to hear from you some ideas about how teachers can use these courses. So please share that in the chat window. There are a lot of resources included in each of the 3 science courses. Lots of really good links that have been reviewed and evaluated, and you know, it's just not just a random collection. They're very purposefully selected. So lots of good links in there. Thank you for sharing that. Here's an example from Holly Durhammer about how she used the scientific practices in context. She got a lot of good ideas, and one of the things that she thought was most interesting was using the students as creating a human pH scale. She had them line up and to teach them about the pH scale. So that's one example of how to incorporate some of the activities that she enjoyed that activity and the movement of that to help students understand the concepts of the pH scale. This is another example, a second testimonial from an ABE instructor, and she says that teaching science in an ABE ASE classroom can be intimidating. At least it is for me. Science is not my area of expertise. It probably isn't for most of us. However, the linked science courses, engaging adult learners in science and scientific practices, help me realize that I've been integrating science into my classroom all along. I've discovered the lessons I have taught on the scientific method as well as my other science lessons can be adjusted to include the scientific practices approach. The links courses include several useful resources for how to engage my students in the scientific practices for their everyday life, as well as how to retrofit my science lessons to the career and college readiness standards. And I think she makes a really important point that this is something that she was already doing. She just found ways to make some tweaks here and there. She said, I feel more comfortable with integrating science into my classroom and excited about creating future lessons. That was from Terry. So some recommendations for program managers, and I just see one.
Oh, Sharon, I think you dropped off again. We'll just give you a second there. As we're waiting for Sharon, I'll point out what I think she was going to point out, which is that over in the chat feature, Susan has noted that these courses can be a great basis for instructor study circles, and they can be. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the professional development tips next. So here's Sharon back. So the program managers here, I know in the beginning most of you are teachers, but we did have a couple of program managers, and we were wondering if there were any of the program managers here who have used these as a required training for teachers, or if they've just been something that they've suggested. So just a quick raise hands using the little hands feature if you're a program manager who has required or suggested to your teachers or volunteers that they take these courses. Oh, we have one person, Cindy. Great. Cindy, if you want to type a little bit in the chat about how you've used that, I'm sure we would all be very interested. Well, while Cindy's talking, or chatting, I should say, I'm gonna move us forward. Unless there are any other questions on this slide, we'll move on to the professional development. And here we had a couple of examples. For example, guiding a cohort of teachers in taking the course. As Susan recommended earlier, this could be the basis of a study circle. Facilitating follow-up discussions on course concepts. This can include conversations online or through your own means of communication. Using the extended learning activities as a basis for ongoing engagement. All the courses have printable, downloadable, savable PDF files that can be used while you're taking the course, or they can be saved for use at a different time. And then lastly, encouraging the use of the links discussion threads as an additional means of continuous support. This is also a great one because you get to tap into our SME under the links community, which is Susan Cowles, who's also on today's webinar. So thank you, Susan. I want to just go back to Cindy's comment. We are just beginning. The entire staff will take the course, and then we have a date that we will meet to discuss the course and how we will use the concepts in the classroom. That sounds great. Cindy, please keep in touch with us. We want to know how that's going. Okay, so I see Sharon is back. I'm glad you got back in. We're having a little internet issue. So I want to turn it over quickly, though, to Cynthia Zaft, who I'm sure many of you know as the Links Regional 1 Professional Development Center. She has been using the course in her role as a professional developer. So I just want to turn it over to her to talk a little bit about her experience using the course.
Hi, Jessie. Let me ask you if this audio is okay before I get going.
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, good, good. So greetings from World Education. I'm here in Boston, and I'm also part of the Links Region 1 Professional Development Center, as Jessie mentioned. And of course, I took the original 2 courses, and the newest course must have slipped up and onto the Links site, and I'll be taking it, starting it this week. And so I've done that and kept up with the community of practice like many of you have, but I also want to mention 2 other ways that I've used it. They've kind of been alluded to here. The first, as part of my science literacy work at World Education, the Institute for the Study of Adult Literacy at Penn State asked me if I would facilitate a set of extended professional development opportunities for Pennsylvania teachers interested in bringing more science content into their teaching and learning. And so each of the science courses have been used as a kind of backbone to these professional development opportunities, and each week participants would complete one section of a course. The courses are divided into 3 sections, so they would do about a third of the course. And then they would also respond to the questions in the course. And they were doing it rather than on the science community of practice. They were using a Wigio that's set up by on the state professional development portal. And then at the end of the week, teachers would check back in with a Wigio again and read and respond to posts from their fellow teachers. Since the courses included a lot of very high-quality science resources, teachers typically commented on what they had found, how they thought they would use it, and really had an opportunity to develop a Pennsylvania community of practice that is focusing on science and continuing to do that. And then the second way that we've used it here is through our Links Region 1 quarterly newsletter for practitioners. We have a quarterly newsletter that goes out to our state directors and professional developers, and that is pushed out to teachers, to practitioners in the field. The newsletter is thematic, and it just so happened that the most recent newsletter is focused on science. It includes a brief interview with a teacher. It happened to be Holly again. As part of the Pennsylvania science cohort, she used the science courses to tweak a nutrition unit that she had been working with to really kind of bump up the science and add multimedia to it. The newsletter also kind of tied together a whole series of resources that are available around science on the Links website, from the resource collection, definitely the science courses, and then a recent webinar on statistics for action. So the newsletter sort of tied all of this together for practitioners, and we sent that out last week. And of course, we also mentioned an upcoming webinar on teaching and learning in STEM subjects. So that's another way that we've used it. But I'll maybe give you a chance now to see if people have a few either questions or if they have some other ideas that they'll be sharing. Thanks.
Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, so if participants have questions or comments for Cynthia, please feel free to add that in the chat either now or later. Susan, your question, does every Links region have a newsletter? It does. I'm going to let Joe or Sarah type their response to you in the comments so that you know how to get connected. If there's any other questions, please go ahead and type them in, but I'm going to move forward now to talk about how to access the courses. I saw a question in here from, I believe it was Brett, about the single sign-on, and we will talk about that because it's a new feature. So here's just a brief refresher for most of you, I think, since you have already accessed at least one of the courses. First, again, all of the science courses are available 24/7 in the LINCS Learning Portal. To access the courses, you do need to be a registered member of LINCS. And as we mentioned previously, users had to register separately to access the LINCS Learning Portal. As we just mentioned, that's no longer the case. Users' LINCS and LINCS Learning Portal accounts were merged on August 5th of this year, enabling users to sign in only once to access their account. If you already had a Learning Portal account, then the first time you logged into LINCS after August 5th, you are prompted to change your password. If you did this, congratulations, you're done. You now have one combined LINCS account. If you never had a LINCS Learning Portal account, access has now been automatically added to your LINCS account. So I'm now going to walk you through how to access the courses on the Learning Portal. From the LINCS homepage, hover over the Professional Development drop-down on the navigation bar. Select LINCS Online Courses. This page provides more information about some of Octave's courses available on the Learning Portal. Click on one of the links on the page to the LINCS Learning Portal. You may be prompted to sign in, but it should save your password. All of Octave's courses are accessible from this main screen. Courses are organized by federal initiative. The LINCS courses are found halfway down the page under the heading LINCS Science. Click on the course you want to enter, and as you note, there are now 3 courses, so we've just launched the 3rd course this week. To launch the course, simply click on the title of the course. Then click Launch. Click Enter to launch the course. This is a screenshot of the course itself. The course appears in a new window. If you previously logged into the course, it will appear on the last screen you completed. That allows you to complete the course in several sessions. Once you've finished the course, navigate back to the original window, which will still be open. Click on the Certificate of Completion to access your certificate. Here's my example certificate. Okay, so we've now come to the end of our formal presentation, so please go ahead and type into the chat box any questions you have about today's presentation. Sharon, Cynthia, and I would be happy to respond to any of your questions. This webinar wasn't listed on the main page here. Let me go back to it so you can see. The course is listed on the Learning Portal. The webinars aren't. Here we go. So here you can see these are all the courses that Octave has available, and all 3 of the courses are listed. Brett. Oh, we have a question for you, Cynthia. If you could describe the workshop you gave at COABE.
Sure. Oh my gosh, that was a while ago, but we had a heck of a good time. Let me think. What I did was I did an overview of LINCS resources, and I focused primarily on the science resources. So we did look at where the science courses were and the resource collection. And then we did a series of activities together as a group. Primarily, one of the things that we were looking at are the college and career readiness standards, and then the science next-gen science practices, and also the math college and career ready and science practices, to see how they go together, and they actually combine quite well. So we were doing some activities, some hands-on activities, using science teaching, resources and trying them out ourselves. It was a lot of fun. Is that a sufficient description, do you think?
Yeah.
Good.
I want to respond to Mary's question, how long does each course take? It varies. We give a approximate time on each of the landing pages for the course, and that number appears on the certificate. I think the text is probably a little too small for you to be able to see it. I'm just scrolling through to see if you can see it on the certificate, or if it's too small. You can see it. Depending on your eyesight, you may be able to see that it says 2.5 hours. So that does show up on your certificate, and it's also on that landing page. So it varies. I think the first course and the third course are both 2.5 hours, and the second course is 3 hours. Will our links account reflect all the courses completed? Yes, Susan, your links account does show which ones that you've completed, and it also only lets you print off certificates, obviously, for the ones that you've completed. You can't print a certificate if you haven't completed it. And the way that links tracks if you've completed a course is if you've gotten to the end. So you have to, complete all of the activities in the course to get to the end. That doesn't mean you have to complete those extended learning activities that I mentioned earlier. Those extended learning activities can be printed, they can be saved, they can be reflected upon, they can be shared with your teachers, they can be shared with a cohort. So those are not required to move forward. You do have to click on them and look at them, but you don't have to complete them. Mimi, will be a way to share this, to access this PowerPoint presentation? Yes, we will go ahead and share this presentation with you. We're also going to be archiving it for today's presentation, so you can access it at any time. Brett also asked if there will be more webinars like this. As we mentioned, we'll be archiving this, so you can actually access this webinar itself at any point. In Links, we have webinars all the time, depending on the group and the topic. So just, I would say, stay tuned and read your announcements, because we're always coming up with new ones. I just want to mention Cynthia's comment here that the participants outside of Pennsylvania use the science community of practice. We used a science microgroup to allow COE participants an opportunity to reflect on using the lessons in their class. Oh, that's great. Will you be developing lessons I can use in my classroom? So no, the course really guides you in developing your own lessons that you can use in the classroom, but it gives a lot of resources that you can tap into and really use to build those lessons. So I would say that the courses will give you motivation and inspiration and resources, but it is up to you to develop them on your own to build those skills. So I wasn't actually planning on doing this, but I can show you the discussion thread if I share my screen. Let me go ahead and do that briefly while we take more questions. So is everyone able to see the links community that I'm showing right now? Okay, great. So this is the main community page. I'm already logged in. You just go to groups. And then I'm a member of the science group. I would think most of you are too. Let's go down here to science. Oh, so you can't see my screen. Okay. Let's see. How about now? Can you see it now? How about now? Okay, well, that's what I get for trying to do it on the fly. Sorry. What we can do here, if you click on the link at the highlighted words discussion thread on your own screen, go ahead and click on that, and that will actually take you to the follow-up discussion in the Link Science group. It's not going to take you to the embedded conversations in the courses themselves. For those of you who have taken the courses, you'll notice that in the courses there's links to the community and to those discussions. So there's discussions for each of the courses on there, but then this discussion thread in particular is to follow up for today's webinar.
I just want to say thank you for participating today, and wondered if there were any final questions for me before we wrap up the webinar.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you guys for your participation today. Continue to type in your questions, and we'll see if we can answer them on the discussion thread. Before you go, please click on the link to the evaluation on the screen, and please take just 2 minutes or so to fill out that form. We'll also be communicating, as we said, we'll be sending out the presentation slides and a link to the archive so you can share it with your teachers or your networks. Again, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you also, Susan Cowles, our SME moderator who was on today. And again, please don't hesitate to post your questions or comments in the discussion thread. So thank you guys so much.